So we'll continue with our next talk. The next talk is from Professor Ramagopal Uppaluri. So a short introduction before he starts his talk. Dr. Uppaluri holds MTech in Chemical Engineering from IIT Kanpur, a PhD in Process Integration from University of Manchester, United Kingdom. After a brief tenure of postdoctoral research at Robert Gordon University, he joined IIT Guwahati as a faculty of chemical engineering. Within a short span of 8 years, he became the youngest professor of IIT Guwahati. Till date, 16 scholars received PhD under his supervision, and presently he has 20 PhD scholars working under his active guidance. Apart from his past success stories involving mass transfer, virtual laboratory and refinery process design lecture notes, his recent success story has been in the affirming of Indo-Japan joint MTech degree in food science and technology between IIT Guwahati and Gifu University. Despite having a very busy and demanding academic and research guidance schedule, Professor Uppaluri works extensively on the affirming of science-spirituality synthesis model of Dr. T.D. Singh through the formal offering of certificate and diploma courses on science and spirituality. Along with few other scholars and faculty of Bhaktivedanta Institute, he developed several certificate courses, namely Foundation of Science and Spirituality, Nature of Reality, Professional Excellence, Personal Excellence, Philosophical Excellence. The team also developed a one-year diploma course on science and spirituality and is presently engaging to have deliberation with reputed institution to offer the developed course content on a collaborative basis. Professor Uppaluri is also an expert in teaching Bhagavad Gita, spirituality in world religions. His team developed 2 certificate courses in this direction, Successful Life Journey, Insights from Bhagavad Gita, and Yoga and Spirituality, Explorations from Bhagavad Gita. With both professional and spiritual maturity, the Department of Distance Education can venture into dynamic and challenging collaboration in the applications of science spirituality and applied spirituality or Vedanta. So with this short introduction, I welcome Professor Ramagopal Uppaluri. The title of his talk today is Consciousness an Epiphenomenon or molecular reactions or N interactions? So with this, I think you can start now.
Thank you, Deepankar, and pranams to everyone at Europe, and good afternoon to everyone in India. The word epiphenomenon, maybe some of you are well aware of this, but the easiest dictionary meaning that we can get is a secondary product or a byproduct. So the talk today goes into looking whether molecular reactions are fundamental and consciousness is derived from molecular reactions. I've been mentored by Dr. T.D. Singh, His Holiness Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj. I've been working under his guidance for nearly a decade. I worked under him, and I have been engaged in the early articles of Savijnanam and also many of his writings. I was instrumental towards the conference series and publications. And after studying his books for more than a decade, we are now offering them in the form of short courses, 2 to 3 months on a weekend basis. We can offer it to anyone, including those in Europe, America, and other countries. It can be done online. So to promote these courses exclusively, we have registered a trust at Guwahati, where I stay here. The trust is called Dr. T.D. Singh Global Excellence Foundation. The trust only caters towards these academic deliberations and support the continuing emphasis on the legacy of Dr. T.D. Singh given to Bhaktivedanta Institute, Kolkata. Coming to the contents, I have the contents presented in 6 segments. I will start very fundamentally about the properties of consciousness, and we want to say something is happening in a molecular reaction basis, then what should be the characteristics that as a scientist I will be looking into. Then I will go into quantum mechanics and consciousness, philosophical projections, Vedantic explorations and consciousness. Conclusions. First thing is properties of consciousness. So, what are the properties that we should say that consciousness have? Well, there isn't any broad definition for consciousness because some say it is awareness, some say it's wakefulness, some say it's the self, some say mind controller, feeling, subjective experience. So till date, no universal definition exists for consciousness. The best way we understand consciousness is through our own experience. And given this basic limitation, it's very difficult to march in this field of consciousness. A big problem in consciousness is called hard problem of consciousness. So hard problem means that when we get an experience, we get an experience of the worldly things. The worldly things are matter, but the experience is not just matter, because matter can have any representation as we want, but the experience is a unique experience which may be unique for a particular person. So how the physical connections from the eye to the synapse to the brain translate into experience. This is what we call as hard problem. How subjective experiences occur through the hardware of the human body. Till date, there is no solution to the hard problem. Those who are interested, they can study this paper of Chalmers, 1995, in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. Another problem that we have in consciousness studies is binding problem. So binding problem means, suppose if I see a flower, the flower has fragrance, the flower has shape, the flower has color, the flower has aesthetics. All these are processed in different portions of the brain, but ultimately I see only one flower. I don't see separate realities. I only see one reality. So how this is, everything is unified. So that's what we call as the binding problem of consciousness. Now I'm going very short here because I've been given any short time. So my number of slides are less. If you want, you can have more interaction or contact me to my WhatsApp also, no problem. Now I go to molecular reactions and their characteristics. The first thing that scientists try to convey that a molecular reaction exists is by a physical quantification through an instrument. Like I'm showing here the PCR, polymerase chain reaction, in which the copies of DNA get amplified from a portion of the DNA. Now the real-time PCR uses fluorophores and fluorescence spectroscopy to detect levels in the gene expression. And the fluorescence chart displays the green fluorescence, like you can see the green fluorescence, the dark green one, you can see here. So the instrumentation is required to quantify molecular reaction. So any molecular reaction today we can use a chromatograph or NMR spectroscopy, or so many high-end equipments are there. Like nowadays, I'm working on herbal medicine. So there is something called film lithography and this type of stuff in biotechnology. So we can see that to quantify molecules, we have a physical framework because we know the working principle. And quantum theory is also established. This is an article of David Clary in Science Journal in 1998. He's saying that quantum theory can establish the chemical reaction dynamics with a greater accuracy. So therefore, if we say that consciousness is having sort of quantum is a sort of molecular reactions, then we should be able to define it through the quantum theory. So therefore, can consciousness be defined through quantum theory? That is another issue that we have to look into. And another issue that we can find is awareness. Professor George Wald, in an article shared with Bhaktivedanta Institute, he conveyed that as a human being he can see, and he also knows that a frog can see and respond to the stimuli. But are we sure that whether the frog is aware of its stimuli, or is it doing mechanically? He's conveying there is nothing I can do as a scientist to answer that kind of question. So the problem in consciousness studies is experience. My experience is unique. And if I share my experience with others, others can at least understand what my experience is. So same is the case with vegetative consciousness. When someone is in coma, we don't know what their level of consciousness is, but we can think that it is like sleep, or it is like even lower than sleep. So it is something that we cannot speak, give reasoning because we don't have any idea about it. Same is the case with meditation. When someone is in deep meditation, the awareness with external reality could be lost. So then, under those circumstances, the experience of the person may be difficult to recall. So all these are indicating that the empiricism will have a lot of challenge to resolve awareness. Now, if we say it's epiphenomenon, the first thing that comes to us is Darwin's theory of evolution. And if you believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, monkeys can evolve to human beings. And when we do consciousness studies, we find that monkeys do not have higher levels of self-awareness, whereas human beings have. So therefore, there is a test called mirror test. Monkeys do not pass through mirror test, whereas human beings pass through mirror test. So therefore, if we accept the epiphenomenon hypothesis, then if monkeys evolve to human beings, then we must also find some molecules that are responsible for self-awareness. So I will try to present a logic in this presentation with which we can say that it's not possible by doing any sort of analysis. So we now come to quantum mechanics and consciousness. Suppose if I say consciousness is represented through quantum mechanics. The problem is that consciousness is the ground to study quantum mechanics. Like when people studied in the early stages of quantum mechanics, there was a problem called wave function collapse. That means when we try to measure a quantum phenomena, the measurement actually does not allow the validity of the Schrodinger wave function. That's what we call as wave function collapse. Von Neumann, in his article on these mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics, he conveyed that all these physical instruments like Geiger counter, camera, eye, brain, they may exist in wave functions. But consciousness cannot exist in wave function, because if consciousness exists in wave function, it cannot do the experience. So consciousness must be in a very, very subtle framework, and it can cause the collapse of the wave function, which is not possible. Here there can be multiplicity of quantum states in the brain, in the eye, in the camera, in Geiger counter, but not in the consciousness. So that conveys that quantum mechanics is the end result of consciousness, and consciousness cannot have quantum mechanics built into it. Similarly, there are many theories that try to convey that quantum world and conscious world are analogous. But this analogy is not going to solve the problem. The reason is the brain simply does not follow quantum laws. This quantum coherence happens at very low temperatures, whereas the brain is functioning at very high temperature. Compare it to the superconductance observed at 90 Kelvin. So at these temperatures, if any quantum fluctuations happen, there will be a lot of disturbance or noise, and therefore the convergence is going to be difficult and coherence will not be easy. And hence, Professor Penrose says that quantum mechanics is not a final theory and it is incomplete. And we don't believe that consciousness can be understood in terms of present day science. David Chalmers also echoes with these views. In 1995 article on the puzzle of conscious experience, he suggested that Hameroff and Penrose, they are presenting some quantum theory on consciousness. But he says the theory is silent about how these processes might give rise to conscious experience. So it's exactly saying about the heart problem. No matter how much we present a quantum theory, a theory is not equal to experience, because the theory of consciousness is only based on physical processing, but non-physical entities such as spirituality, contemplation, intuition, thinking, feeling, willing, all these things are beyond the scope of quantum mechanics. So therefore, the hard problem requires the integration of spiritual science with the material science. Now we go to philosophical projections. The problem in consciousness is self-referencing or self-inferencing. So let's say I ask myself, is consciousness a molecular phenomena? Then the next question that comes is that I myself am consciousness and I am trying to explain a molecular phenomena. That is, if I consider myself as subject and consciousness and molecular phenomena as object, there will be subject-object paradox. So therefore the subject and the object are both the same. This is what we call as self-inferencing systems. Like we have a famous statement called liar's paradox. So this is indicating that no matter how much we inquire about this system will still have a lot of incompleteness, because the inquirer and the inquired both are the same content. Now similar views we can find in Dr. Tononi's research at University of Wisconsin, USA. In the 2010, some newspapers advertised that Dr. Tonini is going to come up with a consciometer with which one will be able to quantify consciousness in human beings. But he himself says that it has restrictions. Like nowadays we have the MRI, the fMRI hooked up to patients. And these are patients with vegetative consciousness not having good health. And they ask people to think about playing tennis. He says that if you get a response in the fMRI, I think it's a proof that someone's there. But if you don't get it, it's not a proof of anything. So this is exactly the problem that we have. That sometimes we may not get any response, but that does not mean that it does not exist. So this shows the limitations of our biofeedback studies, where instrumentation can only give us an inferential understanding of the reality, but not the actual content of the reality. Now, in 1998, one article was written by Moravec. He compared the human and monkey ability in terms of a supercomputer and conveyed that both humans and monkeys have similar brain structure. That is, the brain can process 10 million million instruments per second, and both the brains, the human brain is 100 million and the monkeys have got 10 million. Fortunately, human beings and elephants have similar content. That is, both have 100 million. And why I am bringing these three guys here? Because the elephant passed the mirror test, the human beings passed the mirror test, but the monkey did not pass the mirror test. So therefore, the human beings, did they evolve from elephant? This is something very difficult for us to accept. If we say that we evolved from monkeys, the monkeys do not pass through the mirror test. So again, there is another issue that comes in consciousness, these evolution studies. How did biomolecular evolution of consciousness happen from a monkey to a human being? Whereas the human being's consciousness is similar to that of elephant as far as Miller test is concerned. So therefore, this is conveying that if we accept this epiphenomenon of our monkeys to human beings, we must be able to quantify it. But there comes a thing called paradox. What is meant by paradox? Paradox means we start with a question and we get a solution, and when we go around the solution, we'll again get back to the same question. So how does that come here? So if we accept that evolution theory is correct, we'll accept that which biomolecules or mutations are giving rise to consciousness. Then the next question that we need to ask is that what are the laws of consciousness? How can you measure or analyze it? Then the answer is consciousness can be only understood through experience. Then next comes the question, is the experience a hardware, a molecular effect, or a software, a transcendental effect, or both? So again, they again come back to the same question, which biomolecules are giving rise to consciousness. So this paradox will never be broken unless the laws of consciousness are understood. And the laws of consciousness require an element of spirituality. Even philosophical paradigm cannot provide insights here, because in philosophy, we go into a reality which we can't explore also. Like say the case of meditation I was saying, the subjective states of meditation cannot be understood by a scientist who is not meditating. And even the subject may forget what's going on in the meditation because of disconnecting from the attention levels. So now I come to Vedantic explorations. Bhagavad Gita nicely conveys one nice sloka that conveys that there are different levels of the reality. The main problem in science is that we try to blend everything into one reality and we try to hook up everything. Bhagavad Gita says, Indriyani parani ahur indriyabhya paramana manasastu para buddhi yo buddhe paratas tusa. So here it says the human body is driven by senses, which are driven by mind, which is driven by intelligence. And the intelligence is driven by the consciousness of the soul or the Atman. So consciousness is the property of the soul according to Bhagavad Gita, and hence the soul with its ego conditioned in the material nature is driving the activities of the living entity. So that's what Bhagavad Gita conveys. Now, how to bring research into consciousness studies? Dr. T.D. Singh gave a wonderful table. This is from his book called Life, Matter and Interactions. So here he is comparing everything in a scientific spirit. He is saying that if we want to study heat, then we measure temperature. Similarly, if we want to study soul, then we need to study the consciousness. In the science, if we want to measure temperature through a thermocouple, we use the voltage phenomena. That is, somehow we convert the heat into voltage. More the heat, more the temperature, more the voltage. So therefore, there will be proportional loss, and we'll try to get some formula out of it. Similarly, if we study consciousness, which is experience, the experience is presently in the form of thinking, feeling, and willing. So thinking, feeling, and willing are driven by remembrance, forgetfulness, knowledge, all these things, and these are mediated by Paramatma according to Bhagavad Gita. The underlying relationships in science are mathematical and deterministic, whereas in the spiritual realm they are non-deterministic. And the device that is to be used is the soul itself with purified internal senses. So, very nicely Dr. T.D. Singh is conveying in his book that we need to go into the experiential framework to understand consciousness, but not an empirical approach. If we go into empirical approach, we still have the same problem that we are presently having, that we will keep on adding theories, but those theories cannot translate into experience. If I give a book of the theory, but the book of the theory cannot be equal to my experience after reading the book. So therefore, there is a loss of information. Dr. T. Singh in his book Life, Matter and Their Interactions opined like this. In a materially conditioned state, the Atma normally perceives external arrangements of matter through the gross senses of the physical body. The data for such perception pass through sense organs, nerves, other physical structures. But in order for perception to take place, these data must ultimately reach the Atma or spirit arm. So what he is saying is that the sense organs, nerves and physical structures, they are actually providing the material impulses, the responses, the stimuli in terms of chemical transmission in the neurons and all that stuff. But this transmission itself is not enough. Ultimately, this information should reach the Atman or spirit arm. The spirit arm must therefore possess its own senses or means of direct perception. So this is very important statement. We are trying to measure the external reality without a spiritual sense. So therefore, the measurement of the external reality is not going to give us a better understanding of the reality, because the reality is variegated. We ourselves are variegated. We ourselves are having certain level of contamination of the material nature, and with this contamination of material nature, we will not be able to quantify other living entities who have different levels of conditioning of material nature according to Bhagavad Gita. It is this capacity of direct perception which must be invoked in order for the Atma to study itself, other Atmas and the Paramatma. Perception through the limited medium of gross material instruments, including the bodily senses, can only give indirect evidence of the Atma, since these instruments make use of an inferior mode of interaction. So this inferior mode of interaction we find here is that the physical, the sensory based understanding. But we all know that the sensory based understanding fails when we enter into the field of quantum physics. The sensory based understanding fails when we enter into biofeedback studies of vegetative consciousness patients. So it's all like very hazy area. We may get some results and we should be happy with what we get. So that's the problem. This is the inferior mode of interaction. When we take an fMRI of a coma patient, the fMRI tells the brain states. So that's like hardware-software connection. By understanding the hardware, we cannot understand the software. The hardware is given for the software to function, but the hardware cannot represent the software. So that's how we have to look into. The software is consciousness, and the hardware is the brain and the brain structure and the entire physical body. The main problem in the scientific approach is trying to project whether hardware extends back to software. Now I come to conclusions. This statement of Professor George Wald is very important. In my life as a scientist, I have come upon two major problems, which though rooted in science, though they would occur in this form only to a scientist, project beyond science and are, I think, ultimately insoluble as science. He's saying there are two problems that are not solvable. That is hardly to be wondered at, since one involves consciousness and the other in other cosmology. So, a scientist who worked in this physiology or medicine is opining that consciousness is beyond the purview of the science. Similarly, Planck, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. So, if consciousness can be represented by matter, by now the scientific community would have presented it in terms of matter. The only way we are understanding presently consciousness is by quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, that is showing the fuzzy nature of the quantum reality, the wave function collapse and this type of studies that are indicating a greater complexity to understand consciousness. Forget about its epiphenomena analysis. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. So, consciousness is the ground that makes everything in the universe. So, these are my conclusions. Molecular reactions being quantified through instruments do not have an analog even with the fMRI. So, if we want to represent consciousness in molecular reactions, they do not have an analogy because, as I told, the information is lost. Then quantum physics is incomplete and cannot comprehend consciousness due to self-referencing issue. Yeah, wave function collapse is conveying nicely that quantum theory is incomplete. But many researchers in quantum physics can say that we can understand consciousness nicely through quantum physics. Dr. T.D. Singh opined, no. And the fact is that there are good number of evidences. Because even if I propose a quantum theory, in the quantum theory again, there will be a non-representation of the experience. Experience is something unique that cannot be written. Even if someone gives me a lot of paper, I will not be able to write what is my experience. I can give few traits of my experience, but that does not mean it is equal to experience. The biomolecular evolution of consciousness is also having a severe limitation of self-referencing and inference. As I conveyed, if biological molecules have awareness, we must convey what are the properties of awareness in a scientific framework. And Vedanta ascertains that consciousness exists beyond ego, intelligence, mind, but presently it is in conditioned state. So we cannot understand mind through intelligence, we cannot understand intelligence to ego, and similarly we cannot understand ego and go to understanding of the soul. That's what Bhagavad Gita says. These are all in different realities. And Dr. T.D. Singh conveys that purity will only enable realization of experiential states of consciousness. So therefore, the scientist attitude must move away from experiment to experience. And consciousness is a wonderful subject to make a person philosophical and even spiritual. So we have started addressing these tough subjects in science spirituality and started offering online certificate courses. Foundations of Science Spirituality, already Mr. Deepankar conveyed this. This is our email address. If you are interested, please write to us. Even if 1, 2 or 5 people are interested, we can conduct a session. There is no problem. We also have online interactive sessions. These are the topics that will be covered in these courses. I'll just browse them. I will not talk about it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Ramagopal Uppaluri, for a nice talk. So now I'd like to request or go to our audience if they have any question. You can raise your hand.
So the aspect of purity, how would you define it scientifically, and how would you inspire, or how would you transfer it to the scientific world for them, so that they achieve that purity and so that they can have a good picture of reality?
Very nice question, sir. I mean, if we read the works of Dr. T.D. Singh, we'll find, like, there is a book called God is a Person. What should be the attitude of a scientist towards understanding the reality? Very nicely, Dr. T.D. Singh made this. Professor Phillips and Professor Towns. If we study their articles, then we will have that what is that purity it means. I mean, like when we do science, we must see it as an instrument to understand the higher reality. We should not have the arrogance which is very much dominating because of our success that we get. First point is that. And when we go into a field like consciousness, and especially vegetative states of consciousness, we must accept the outcome, and it should not be seen like, the theistic groups winning a war against atheism, or atheistic groups losing the war. I mean, this is how the entire media would project it. Professor Towns, Professor Phillips, in his interaction with Dr. T.D. Singh, he was very nice. I mean, we can find that he is saying that some of us have accepted that God exists, but there are our good friends who also do not accept that God exists. So, we respect their views. Because we are going through the method of inference here, which is, which requires element of faith, it cannot be enforced on anyone. Our approach has to be, we can make them our good friends first, and later we can gradually make them also think in this direction. But there are scientists of different levels also. Like, say, for example, Professor Phillips is saying in his article that when I am doing experiment, I am thinking that I am praying to God to reveal me the reality. Now, can this be given to someone who does not have that faith and belief in God? It can't be. So that's why we need to have a decorum, and we need to have a framework for accommodating this purity. The purity, negative elements for purity I have already mentioned, arrogance, or, a scientist's attitude should be only to understand the reality. And if it is fuzzy, it is the nature of the scientist to say that the reality is fuzzy in this platform. I hope I have conveyed to you, sir.
Yes. Thank you for your answer. So due to limitation of time, we'll just proceed with our event. Thank you, Ramagopal Uppaluri, Professor, for your nice talk and gracing us with your presence from India online. So big round of applause once again to you.
No.
Thank you.